this meeting to order. Do I have a second?
Second.
Aye.
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 I'm going to pass off the advisory board for their motion to start the process of the meeting.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to begin this session of this joint advisory board, select board session. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 You good?
So I just want to thank everybody for joining, for coming to the joint select board advisory board meeting. That's going to, for the town meeting that's going to be held June 2nd on the 25-26 budget. Rick, I will hand it off to you and start the process there. So.
Shall we start with the pledge?
Yes.
All right. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We'll go ahead and get started. And the intent of this joint meeting this evening is to specifically discuss the articles that had been pushed due to a recessing. Sorry, we got some feedback.
They know, they're aware.
Okay. So the purpose of the meeting, again, is to discuss the articles specifically that were recessed at town meeting and special town meeting. So those specifically include from special town meeting is Articles 2, which is Personnel Bylaw Schedule A and B Compensation, Article 6, which is Free Cash, and then within town meeting, annual town meeting, it is Articles 2, 3, 4, and 7. Article 2 is compensation for elected officials. Article 3, the fiscal year 2026 operating budget. Article 4 is the fiscal year 26 capital budget. And then finally, Article 7, which is the Marshfield Community Media Access Services. So I understand that Mr. Moran, Interim Town Administrator, has some proposals for us specifically in regards to, I believe, Article 6 from Special Town Meeting, the free cash article, and then the budget, Article 2, Annual Town Meeting. So if you could, Mr. Moran, if you could walk us through your proposals, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Select Board Chair, members of both committees. I want to start by renewing my thanks for affording me the opportunity to have extra time to look at the budget and come up with as least disruptive proposal and fiscally responsible proposal to make amendments to articles that I could. I am going to focus my discussion on, as you mentioned, on special town meeting Article 6, and then also discuss the annual town meeting Article 3, in which I have a couple of proposed amendments. The primary goal is basically to identify areas to find the money necessary to cover the assessment for the South Shore of Oak Tech School in the FY 2026 operating budget. This is basically, again, as we previously discussed, it's a modest sum, but it is an important sum, and we want to do it, handle it in an appropriate way. So I am proposing, the additional item that I am proposing to address is to revisit the funding of the unemployment line in the recurring or in the fixed services account. And we'll get to that as well. But I would first turn your attention to Article 6 in the special, and I provided you all with copies of memos that I've prepared, and I'm suggesting several amendments to Article 6. And the first is Article 6, subsection 6, the vaccine deficit of $11,000. This was put in to correct an incorrectly categorized flu vaccine. The error can be corrected through the availability of federal funds instead of the use of free cash. So this is a pretty easy fix. Article 6, yeah, sure.
Is just based on the last town meeting and comments we received, can we characterize it as something other than a coding error? The more we
Sure.
say coding error, the more the crowd is going to be upset.
Okay, it
And
was
that
charged.
might interrupt the,
Yeah, no, I can, it's basically charged to the wrong account. It's got to be, yeah. So it can be fixed without an appropriation of free cash. That's the main point. There was, in Article 6, subsection 8, there's a request for $284,000 in police accreditation funding. That request is not necessary. The funding is not necessary. The police chief says he doesn't need it, so that can be pulled out with no impact to the delivery of services whatsoever. In Article 6, subsection 7, there's a contract for $370,000 from Munis Software, or there's a item for $370,000. It can be reduced by $30,000 so that the contractual obligation is covered, but ancillary items that would have been funded in the request are no longer going to be sought. So we're paring that down.
question?
Yeah.
Vin Fallicara Advisory Board. So what are we giving up in that $30,000? What software products are not going to be purchased? Are they important? Is someone going to be doing without? Will we lose ground? This gives no explanation of that.
Shauna, do you want to? I don't think we're giving up anything of importance, and I don't think we'll be losing ground, but I'd defer to Sean to elaborate on that.
So I don't believe we're going to be losing any ground. So this is not going to be any impact to the implementation. It's more of, there are modules and components that we're currently not exercising, so that's where the savings is coming into play.
So what it sounds like to me is we put forth 370,000 where 340 would have been enough, but we put forth a budget, a line item for 370,000.
Well, just keep in mind that we haven't received anything from Tyler, but we've just received what that confirmation of the total was. So when this was presented, it was estimated to be at 370. It's actually lower by 30,000 because
I
we're
like
not.
that a whole lot better
Yes.
than saying we just fluffed our budget.
No, it's because we've actually got hard-coded numbers as opposed to a projection.
Yeah, you're getting my drift here,
I
that
do.
we have to avoid things that are going to, infuriate people, just to keep it a business-like.
Correct.
setting.
But just keep in mind, too, that this article and these totals were created in December, and we've now received finalized information from the software provider. That came in March.
It's a great explanation, Sean. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sean, I have a question. You mentioned one of your comments about paring back, and I think I remember weeks ago we talked about this, and we're about 30% of the modules, not the complexity.
Correct.
So is this part of, are we going to now just postpone more implementation of certain modules?
There are certain modules that we're being charged for that we're reviewing right now, whether or not they're viable going forward, considering the complexity or the needs of the community. So we're looking at that critically to see where we can actually find additional savings.
Okay,
Okay?
all right, thanks.
Next item that I'm proposing to reduce is item 6-13. OPEB funding would be reduced by $150,000 from $200,000 to $50,000. I'm not demeaning or belittling the need for funding other post-employment benefits, but having sat through audits in 2 other municipalities, most recently by the same auditor that you have, they are pointing out that the increased burden of pension assessments is decreasing the ability of municipalities to duly fund both OPEB and pension requirements. And since the plan of most communities is to extinguish their pension debt according to the schedule, the funding schedule that is imposed upon them by their retirement entity, once that is fully funded, then pour over money that was previously appropriated for pension assessments into OPEB until that debt is met. So even the majority of communities aren't funding both, and here we are making a token adjustment that, or a token contribution, which will still be looked favorably upon by rating agencies. The next is item 6, subsection 15, security camera server replacement, $24,000. This, again, is eligible for federal funding reimbursement, and we believe that there is adequate CARES Act money that's available. If it isn't, it can be this can be revisited at a subsequent town meeting, but we think that this is CARES Act eligible and can be done through that.
Question.
Sure.
Which security cameras are we discussing here? Do we know the locations of these?
These are under the custody of the harbor master.
Okay, thank you.
The next is item 6, subsection 18. There was a vehicle lease program proposed, $250,000. The goal of the lease program was to systematically replace aging vehicles, and that's a laudable goal, but it is worth exploring getting this program done through other means. There's a statewide consortium purchasing group called Combis, which the town can avail itself of and could probably replicate the vehicle lease program without a third party involved. Particularly if you know, we were involved in a regional pilot or something like that, you know, should our eligibility for grants be changed. But this could be done. The intent of this article could be achieved just through consortium purchasing. The final two changes that I'm proposing is a reduction in Article 3 of the annual town meeting town administrator salary line. The contract for me extends into fiscal year 2026, and candidly is less costly than a full-time town administrator's cost would be. It is likely that the replacement process and finding of a permanent town administrator will extend a little bit beyond my 4-month appointment. So you'll probably be getting me or somebody else at a reduced rate for an additional portion of the coming fiscal year. That will allow for a reduction in this salary line item, and I'm putting that at $15,000 now. Yeah. The final reduction that I'm suggesting is a reduction in the general insurance appropriation. We heard from our town's insurer recently that we've been awarded rebates on our FY 2025 premiums. You get those for a couple of activities, trainings that you attend, seminars that you attend, claims activity being at a low level. We were approved for a little over $20,000 in reduction in premium that can be applied to the FY 26 billing. So this allows for a reduction in that appropriation. Lastly, what I am proposing is an adjustment to the unemployment appropriation and the fixed cost program and restoring it back to a $40,000 level. Initially, I wanted to do it higher, but there was a skate park article that I originally had in for a reduction that I removed after meeting with with the people involved and found that that was not a viable alternative, given the unique circumstances of their situation. I would also, I'm remiss, there was one late amendment as well, item 616 and Article 6, library Sunday hours. This was in the special town meeting to allow $5,000 to be put towards funding Sunday hours. The librarian has been able to fund those hours without additional funding, and she told me that she was confident that she could maintain that through the end of the fiscal year. We're almost there right now, so that $5,000 is not necessary as well. So with those reductions, you would have enough to fund the assessment, which I believe is $710,000, and there's an additional $39,000 towards South Shore Voc Tech that would have to be put aside. And then you would also have enough money for a $40,000 appropriation into the unemployment line. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have at this point.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Mr. Warner, a few questions. First, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So it's $750,000 for the fiscal year 2026 assessment for the SSVT. You just said 710. Can you?
Yeah, it breaks down into 710 and an additional 39 for an additional, the assessment breaks down into two categories. One is per student, and the second one is, I believe, that a stabilization contribution based on number of students or in population as well. So it breaks down into 710 and 39, and it adds up to.
Okay, so that 39 is a component of what we owe every year,
Yeah.
but except that it would change
Yeah.
based upon how many students are enrolled.
Yes, and I would also like to add, when this is presented at town meeting, it will be in an education budget, which will break out the Marshfield Public Schools budget, the South Shore Voc Tech and budget, and what is being appropriated for that, and then thirdly, the Norfolk County Aggie assessments and what's being appropriated for that. So everybody will have a clear and transparent, itemization of where the money's going.
Okay. A couple additional questions. So the reason why we're all sitting here tonight is because there was a $750,000 miss, right? And I guess my question is, anytime we ever have an issue, is how do we make sure that we don't have the same issue again? So I'm curious, and I know that you've only been on the job for a couple months now, a month and a half. You've probably seen a lot and heard a lot. What do we do from a high-level perspective, and it might be something that you're still kind of playing around with in terms of a solution, to make sure that we don't run into this problem again, either here with this one in particular, which you would think that we wouldn't, being we're going through this gauntlet, but that we wouldn't run into it with other issues, that it's some other funding that is necessary that somehow gets stepped over. How do we make sure that there's a check and balance to prevent that?
I think that's a great question. What I would say, what I've seen here in the time that I've been here is that, first of all, the manner in which I've been received has been uniformly gracious and professional, okay? I've seen very capable people in every department, I think the work that our finance officers do is on par with any community that I've worked in, and I've worked in quite a few. I think, in many instances, it's excellent, okay? What happened here, I think, is a failure to communicate, to quote an old movie. I think that, I cannot provide a forensic audit per se, but I think that being a new member of a Voc Tech, not being acclimated to the timing that they provide their assessment, they're not being acclimated to your budget calendar which is aggressive. You start earlier and try to finish earlier than most communities. There's nothing wrong with that. It just puts pressure on you to get things done correctly earlier than most communities do. That's not a bad thing, but it's a challenge. I think those two things feed in. The third thing is an organization has to be mature when things don't go exactly the way you think they're going to go. If there's a mistake, you have to identify it and correct it, be upfront about it, and learn from it. I think everyone's here is not going to forget the VOTEC budget next year. I think it's etched in all your memories, and you won't, if it's not there, you'll know what to ask for. So by the same token, I think when this happens, when anything happens in a budget, in your experience, you're going to check things more carefully going forward. You're going to ask more questions because your experience is going to inform your inquiries. So those are the two things that I would say. The third thing that I would say is that the challenges that you're going to face in FY27 are going to require significant cooperative dialogue between departments, advisory board, select board, and everyone. That's going to have to be, and the public, it's going to have to be done over a sustained period of time. I would recommend that you start engaging in it right after we, in July, right after we get out of town meeting, because you're facing significant challenges. The challenges are not unique to this community. They're the same challenges that communities are facing all over Massachusetts, particularly in the South Shore. Your revenues aren't growing as fast as your expenses. And it's not because you're not, being prudent with your funds. It's simply you're facing inflation pressures, you're facing collective bargaining pressures, you're facing pension assessments that are going twice the rate in growth versus what average communities are able to grow their revenues. Those things are unsustainable. And so you've got to find a way to address revenues, to address spending, and to do it in a way that can still provide the level of services people have come to expect. So that's going to take a lot of talking, a lot of listening, and a lot of math. But you've got all the ingredients here to solve, to address the problems responsibly and appropriately. And if you get out ahead of it, the sooner you get out ahead of it, the more options you have to address. So,
I appreciate that, Mr. Moore, and completely agree. I appreciate the candidness. And you're right. I think it is something that we need to start to approach pretty immediately after town meeting. When we look at the impact of SSVT, financially speaking, 750 is the first drop, right? Next year, it could be double that, depending upon what enrollment looks like at SSVT. And by the time that we get out to 2029, it could be over, somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million a year, based upon the number of students enrolled, right, and filling the seats that we have allocated to us. And then you add into that any kind of funding of the school itself, right, that has not been or was rejected at the last meeting in terms of the debt exclusion override. And then you're talking a couple more $1 million. I mean, you could, by 2029, have, $4.5, $5 million of, which is 5% of our total expenses that suddenly jump, right? And that's real. And to your point, I think that's not a simple, I mean, you've done a great job here, by the way. I just want to tell you, I appreciate the stones that you've turned over to help get us out of this mess. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot more that we have to find. And there's only going to be so many places we can find it before we have to start finding it through labor cost reductions. And that's a bad word, but we're going to have very honest conversations about, what's out there. So
Yeah,
that way we can be frank with one another.
Yeah, unions are going to have to be involved in helping solve the problems as well. Everybody's going to be invited at the table and pitch in. People have ideas that everyone looks at a problem differently, and people have different approaches, and we have to look at all of them. It's a mix of everything to see what can work. There's ways to grow revenues. There's ways to reduce costs. It's going to be a mix of everything. And, being more efficient in a workplace, unions provide great suggestions, in my experience, in contributing to make things more effective. And, there should be dialogues with them. They should be involved.
Great. We got a lot of work to do. Wanted to ask you a few questions about free cash because to make sure that we're all on the same level understanding here. And this isn't, I'm not suggesting that there's a misunderstanding, but just making sure that we understand a few things from the advisory board's perspective. So free cash is it's more or less the difference, right? The variance between what's been expended and what the revenue is at the end of the year. It's not moved into stabilizations funds.
Yeah, free cash
Well,
comes
that's
from
right.
two sources. One, it comes from revenue surpluses. So your estimates on your new growth, local receipts, your excise, your investment income, all those different sources exceed what you anticipated in making your appropriation determinations. So that's one source. The additional source is operational surpluses. So in the money that was appropriated to run the government, run the town, you experience surpluses in certain departments. So both those sources get swept in. And in my experience, the best practice is to try to get 50-50. 50% from your revenue surplus and 50% from an operational surplus. And oftentimes, in my experience, that operational surplus only comes from one half of the government, roughly from the non-educational side, because the school committee, once money is appropriated to them, they can move it in ways, through their own votes without town meeting appropriations. So they generally have a way of putting the money that they're given, to the greatest good on their side, and not returning much of an operational surplus back to the town. So most of it comes from the other side of operational surplus. It can be from public works, police, fire, a number of areas. The third area that I have always tried to cultivate that feeds into free cash is overlay surplus, which is the money that's set aside for the settlement of assessment cases where property valuations are challenged, and if there aren't as many as anticipated, that money can either be appropriated and transferred as an interdepartmental transfer, or it can flow into free cash.
So we've had historically, just thinking about the last few years, we typically have a decent amount of free cash at the end of every year, right? We're spending that. First question is, you've been in Norwell, you've worked in Norwell, Braintree, you've been all over.
It's pretty much like a phone book, yeah.
You've got a lot of experience. So when you look at us, when you look at the town of Marshfield, and you look at our free cash composition as a percentage of general revenues or expenses, however you want to put it, how do we fare? Are we sitting constantly on a very large surplus?
No, you're right in line with most other communities. There isn't a community that I know of right now that is not using non-recurring sources of revenue to fund operations now. And that's the rule, that you don't want to use non-recurring sources for operational or recurring costs. But right now, with the stressors of inflation and certain budget-busting areas. There isn't a community that isn't dipping into free cash, that I can see right now. You're not doing it as much as other communities. There are other communities that are getting in or using one-time revenue sources much heavier. You're doing it, I would venture to say, as much as your neighbors are. You're in the same ballpark. Your free cash level's healthy.
And when we look at free cash, when we generate free cash, it's because there's been a difference from what was budgeted, right? What was planned for, because you plan a zero-based budget.
Yeah.
And then when you end up spending less, collecting more, however it works out, you end up having that free cash. Is free cash ultimately a result of good budgeting, bad budgeting, or is it really not? Is it neither?
So it should be a sign, if you're experiencing operational surplus, it should be a sign, especially in these days, that you're well managed, because your department heads are not spending to the limit. They're putting trust in the fact that if I need it, I'll get it next year, even though I don't need it now. And that if I turn it over, I have a shot at addressing a non-recurring need through a capital item, it can go to free cash, and I'll see it come back in a non-recurring need, like a capital item or a one-time expense, somewhere else in the articles if I need it, So there has to be a culture that supports departments not spending to the limit and seeing that it pays off to contribute to free cash, that I'm not a sucker for not spending it, and that I trust the folks that are creating my budget, that they'll appreciate the fact that I didn't spend it, but that doesn't mean I might not need it next year, because I might have a change in my personnel. I might have an injury that puts me down 5%. I need to address overtime in an unusual situation, or I'm experiencing supply costs that are growing or something like that I didn't experience this year, but I may next. So just because I don't spend it, don't cut me next year, that type of thing. What I would look at is, okay, if you get a 3-year trend where you're not spending that, I can go after, I can reduce that line and not hurt you. So you want to develop a culture where it's okay not to spend, and that people trust that, it's best for the town. The one caveat on that, there used to be a practice where, in better times, I have seen, there were seminars where they'd say, okay, add another % to your budget that you don't need, because it'll flow into free cash and that'll help you out. You don't have that luxury anymore. That's gone. That was 2015.
That was the build fluff into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't do that anymore.
Right.
And, those days are not present now. So I don't see department heads doing that anymore, and I can catch it pretty easy. So, and you can too.
Now, in reality, to look at both sides of the coin, right? One side is that there's less expenses, and which indicates that there's good management in terms of, from an operational perspective. From a revenue perspective, though, does it imply that we have room there to adjust, in particular in the
So the
downward direction?
cautionary tale on your revenue is that if you miss your mark, that sets off red flags and for your auditors, your rating agencies, and DOR. Because when you want to set your tax rate, when you want to get your free cash certified, you better hit your revenue numbers, or else they're not going to trust you. They're going to think, okay, I have to look harder at this. And you're going to get, my experience with DOR, Department of Revenue Division, the folks that look at when you're trying to set your tax rate, you can pretty much bet that they're going to ask you the same set of questions every year, the same exact questions. And the only time they're going to deviate is if you give them something to worry about. And you don't want to give them new questions to ask, because you want to be at the front of the line. They send the new guy in because they know they can trust you, and they get you turned around really quick so you can set your tax rate and move on. You don't want to give them extra homework, because there's a lot fewer people in DOR than there used to be. They have a higher workload and less patience. So you've got to be conservative in your revenue numbers, more so, so you're going to come in with lower numbers and in those circumstances, so that, yeah, you're going to see a surplus there, just so that you err on the side of caution.
Now, also looking back at the last few years, it's become a custom, I hate to say that word, but or a habit or whatnot, that free cash is where we're going to fund articles that are passed in other meetings, right? In other special town meetings, annual town meetings. So it becomes a funding source. We're using that versus going to capital budgets, right? Because capital budgets would imply that there's going to potential debt that's going to be incurred there. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can use depending on your free cash circumstances and your debt and the percentage of debt versus your operational budget, you can fund a capital item with free cash or bond it, either one. When I first started in the 80s, when I was a town meeting member in Braintree never issued debt. They paid cash for everything, and that was the old way to do it. And now, the accounting rules, the general practices are, you're in trouble if you're not issuing debt to a certain percentage of your operating income, because you're not investing enough in your capital needs, even if you show them, well, I'm using revenue that I have without incurring debt. You still get asked by rating agencies why you're doing that. So using free cash for non-recurring expenses is fine. It's accepted. It's appropriate. And it can be a capital or non-capital amount or item. I mean, in many cases, what you're buying in a non-recurring fashion may not fit the definition cleanly of a capital asset. So, that's another reason to use free cash.
And my last question, and I promise I'll stop asking.
All right. I think the only people that are interested in this stuff are in this room right now. But I really enjoy talking about it, so that's fine.
Well, I appreciate that you enjoy talking. The town meeting and special town meeting, oftentimes we have articles that pop up that don't include, in fact, most oftentimes they don't include the appropriation with the article. So an article is introduced to allow, for example, we want to do X, Y, Z, and we want to give the select board the permission to do that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what it doesn't, and it says that the select board can go raise funds and whatnot, but in reality, what happens is that after that select board, or after that town meeting, annual town meeting, there's then an appropriation that needs to take place, and that appropriation has to get voted on by town meeting. So we can wind up in a situation, and we do from time to time, right, where we say, everybody raises their hand and says, this is a great idea. We love it. Let's do it. But then 6 months later, a year later, now it's coming back, the same question, except in a slightly different form, which is, are we okay with paying for it? And then we're kind of going back through the same discussion all over again. Is it typical to do it that way in towns, or do you also see it in your experience where the appropriation is packaged together with the article? So in other words, you're saying to town meeting, are you in favor of this? Would you like to vote on this? And by the way, while you're voting on this, we're also asking you to approve the appropriation. So that way, be like me saying, would you like to buy a car from me? But I also need you to sign here saying that you're going to buy the car if I sell it to you, right? Not just that you think it's a good idea.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. It's not unusual do this, it's the difference between authorization and appropriation. And what the benefit of authorization is that identifies a future capital expenditure. So, there's different ways to handle that. You can do a strategic capital plan for 10 years and you go out and do an inventory of all capital needs that you have, business expenses, roads, equipment, you name it. You can hire, I got a Commonwealth Compact grant in Norwell, and we did an inventory of all capital, did a 10-year plan, identified about $24 million worth of capital expenses that we would incur over 10 years, and we stuck to it as much as we could. And it works. So an authorization can work in that aspect too. So you are staking a claim that, we've identified this as a priority in our capital plans, so we're authorizing this as an expenditure. What the challenge is then, as you describe, you have to go through the debate at a future date when the money's going to, be appropriated, and you have to, justify this expenditure. And you're often doing it with competing expenses at the same time, both capital and operational, and that can be, challenging. It is cleaner to have the appropriation and the authorization in the same article. If it's at all possible, you can do it. I can tell you, I'm a counselor in Braintree. On the advice of bond counsel, we're retracting a number of authorizations because that have passed previously, because we are adopting a capital plan instead, and it removes some of the identified future capital expenditures from clouding the rating that the town is going to get. So on the advice of bond counsel, we're going to be retracting some of those. And going forward, we're going to try to pair the appropriation with the authorization.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moran. I don't have any further questions. Other questions from the advisory board?
Do you see the cut in funding from the state, the grant funding, affect, like we were talking earlier about what's going to affect FY27? Do you see some of the grant funding as a result of the MBTA, that issue affecting the budget as well? I mean, we're going to have to make up the money somewhere.
I haven't done an assessment of that in particular. I think it's inherently going to put a stressor on the community if it's a reduction in available funding through grants or otherwise. But I can't put a number on that right now, so.
Other questions? Go ahead.
So fiscal year '27, have we, based on the revenue projections versus the expense projections that you described, do we have an idea at all where we're going to stand?
No, I think that's a really, that's a great question, and I did not plan that with you in advance for a segue, but really what the initial foray into our discussions will have to be is to identify the gap. And so that's the first thing that we would do in the summer months, is try to identify, our anticipated revenue needs versus our anticipated revenues. So, and what that gap is. Once we can identify that gap, or, at least have a strong approximation of it, then we can start to address it. But I want to, the first thing is to fairly articulate it, to get everyone to acknowledge it. We're all on the same page, so it won't be a surprise to anyone. And then, we'll have a mission to address it. So the first thing is to identify that gap.
Thank you.
Going back to the capital budget, on, historically with this appropriation and so forth, some of the big projects, the estimate that comes in that we are, by the time we get around getting the project done, costs have gone up 20%, so forth and so on. Just in general, how do you feel, and it's been tough the last few years with the cost increases and whatnot, but in general, how do you feel our capital 10-year plan, I've looked at we have several-year capital budgets. But we talk about it, and then we don't hear about it for a while. You know, we see what was on warrants, what was picked, what wasn't picked. But just in general, do you think we're doing a good job with managing long-term capital?
I think,
Everything to dump trucks to wastewater treatment plants.
yeah, you've got, yeah, and that's what you should have. You should have a wide array of it. And you should be asking questions about, the amount of questions I had to answer about the size of a dump truck in Norwell would take up a night. You know, do we need it? Can we fit it in a garage? How many man hours is it going to go? How long is it going to last? Stuff like that. So, you know, and then how many pickup trucks are we going to turn over every year? Am I putting my cruisers on my operational budget or in my capital budget? And then there's buildings. Then how many road miles are we going to do? All this stuff has to feed in. And then you're talking about schools, boiler replacement, window replacement, HVAC, roofs.
Yeah.
Heaven help you if they have to shovel off of a roof, because then they're going to destroy your membrane, and you're going to have to fix the drainage.
Never heard of
and
that,
like that. And then if they don't shovel the snow away from the windows enough, they pop those, and you're paying for those. So it's got to be all-encompassing. I think you're doing as good of a job in your capital forecasting as any other town. Can you do better? Yeah. But, you know, you're not kicking the can down the road, and you're not ignoring it, and that happens in more towns than you'd think. So,
Okay.
you know, I think people are doing the best they can under the circumstances.
Any other questions from the advisory board?
I only have one question that hasn't been answered, Peter, or maybe it has and I missed it, but, so you are recommending that, that we use CARES Act funding to fund, the vaccine deficit and then also the security camera. I'm just curious, how much CARES Act funding do we still have as a town, right? Because haven't we, I mean, we've had it for a while, right? And then we,
It's either CARES Act or ARPA, but.
Yeah, ARPA.
Yeah, that's why I said federal, because
that's starting to
I
sunset
mix
though,
and
right? Is it
match.
not?
Yeah, it's starting to sunset, but we've still got access to it through the county, I believe.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, after doing the annual reporting recently in April, we have approximately about 380,000. The reason why we're able to take the 11,000 that was posted for the flu vaccines that were administered, that bill was incurred before the December 2024 deadline for obligation by the federal government. So we're able to reclass that expense because the board did vote to allocate $194,000 towards that purpose. And the same thing with the cameras, there was an obligation, or there was information that was presented in October 2024, and there were funds set aside for technology upgrades, which is also covered by the CARES Act. So we're able to take those expenses because we do currently have capacity, and we're able to take those expenses and reappropriate them towards the remaining portion of the surplus that we have.
Yeah, that sounds good. I was curious, and it seems like we still have a pretty healthy amount
Yes,
available for proper use, so sounds good.
we do.
Thanks. That's all I have.
Thanks, Sean.
No other questions from the advisory board? Any questions from the select board?
Yes, I do. Regards to socio-voltech, thank you, Rick. In regards to socio-voltech, and the discussion on it, the expenses and all that, I would like to make a recommendation to the advisory board that if it's within their purview, that maybe it's something you guys want to take up in regards to going over their budget. Because I think if they have a full vetting like you guys are doing with ours, I think you could probably do a whole lot of good for us in regards to money saved. I mean, my speaking to Superintendent Hickey quite a few times, and I've discussed some things, and I wasn't too pleased with the responses I got in regards to cost savings, and one of them was transportation. And And I think that if you guys, after our town meeting, decided to take up and look at South Shore Tech, look at their budget, and then see if you can go through a review process with them, I think that can go a long ways for us, in my opinion, especially when they're looking to build a new building. Mr. Rowland beat me to the punch on the question in regards to the CARES Act money there. I had the same thought process. I do want to ask Sean, though, is that 380, is that after the expenses of this upcoming town meeting, or is that
That's the current surplus.
before it's spent right now? Okay. So what would be at, do you know what would be at after whatever we expend here?
I think we're scheduled to expend most of it, so I'm not sure what remaining projects IT has currently. There might be another additional 100,000+, so I think that we're gonna hover probably around 180,000 as far as unexpended CARES Act.
Is there a timeline when it needs, that 108,000 needs to be spent?
That's by December of 2026.
So next year. And I'm sure we'll have no problem doing that, right? The vaccine deficit. All I know what it was is, I believe Mr. Valcaro made a comment in regards to not wording it in a way to avoid strife from those in attendance, but I think my opinion is that we should be foremost upfront with the people there, and you know something, if they want to have comments in regards to the issues of accounting and all that, then let them speak. I think it's well worth hearing from and us listening and trying to avoid and trying to what can you say, eliminate that problem, in my opinion.
I don't disagree. It seems to me that this is not a coding error as much as we found an opportunity to move the money from some other area.
I guess, my look at it is that, as you state that, is, would that be,
No,
would that,
it was mischarged.
okay.
All right, then that's
Yeah.
what we should report. I don't
Yeah.
disagree.
It was mischarged to a flu account, and it should have been to a, or vice versa, COVID versus flu account.
I just want to call your attention that we're making a concerted effort to correct all of these issues that predate our tenure here.
Good.
So, you know, keep in mind that some of these issues are spanning 3 years in age, and it's actually impacting our free cash number. So we have to clean these things up. We can't let these things linger. So we have to make an effort. And unfortunately, or fortunately in this case, we have to bring it to town meeting. We have to have the town meeting approve because we are impacting our crossing funds. And we want to do things completely transparent so everyone is aware exactly what's happening. And it's unfortunate that it's taken this long to correct these things, but we need to correct them because we're never going to get an accurate free cash number.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In regards to there was talk of the rating agencies, Peter, and you brought up how they rate you on your, and everything. So, and you were saying that if you don't have any debt, it kind of raises an alarm bell with them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, there's best practices of government accounting, sets aside a certain percentage of your operating budget for principal and debt. And it's based on what your total operation is. You're supposed to be somewhere between 3 and 5% of your operating budget should be principal and debt payments for debt that you've issued, so that it shows that you're investing in upkeep of your buildings and replacing capital assets, things like that.
I mean, if you're doing cash and you're keeping up with everything, say if you can pay for it, you and I discussed things today in regards to allocating money and all that, but let's say you have a system set up in regards to, you have money on hand to pay your debt and then as well as take care of other issues in town.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand how that raises a red flag. I would look at that, that's good accounting practices and everything. So I'm just looking at that, with the rating agency, are they trying to do the banks a favor by making the towns be in debt and then collecting the interest off them?
No, your point's well taken. I mean, so if I'm in a call with Standard & Poor's and they're saying, well, your debt position is low, and I can say to them, well, I'm paying for stuff with cash. Well, why are you doing that, and how can you sustain it? If I can show that over 5 years of time, I've been appropriating free cash towards debt instead of incurring debt, and I'm demonstrating that I'm still investing in my property, but not issuing debt to do it, and doing it at the same percentage, but doing it with a combination of cash and debt, it's just, I have to take longer to explain, but the story's good. So I agree with you. If you're in a position where you can meet your capital responsibilities and not incur debt, fine. That's optimal. The thing is, you've got to do it year after year after year and that's hard to do with free cash because you're depending on operational and revenue surplus to provide you with that free cash every year. Whereas when you issue debt, you're locked into a payment annually. And you meet that schedule, and then the rating agency can just check the box. So a mix of that, I think, is good. And I have been in calls where I've said, yes, but we're not meeting the debt, or we're not putting this much towards debt. But our tradition, our custom, if you look at our free cash appropriations through the articles in town meeting, we're doing the same thing, but just keeping it in-house.
All right, so upon yours and I discussion today, we're talking about the solar farms and the revenue that generates. So is that considered free cash money or operational money?
Well, if it's not being appropriated for any other purposes, and it's revenue that you're incurring, that would be on the revenue surplus side of things. And so that could be free cash because it's not obligated to another purpose, and you're incurring it. So, it would be revenue surplus.
Revenue, so you could actually, like you and I discussing, is that repurpose a portion of that to go to certain things, maybe?
Yeah, you could, what we were talking about, whether we could identify needs that are occurring and put certain revenue streams to address them, like OPEB or pensions or capital,
sidewalks,
or
whatever.
special education stabilization funds, things like that, that you could just feed a revenue source or a portion of a revenue source. For instance, Norwell appropriates all of its meals tax into their OPEB fund, as well as doing an annual appropriation and a special town meeting appropriation. So, yeah, if you can dedicate, Braintree does a portion of its meals tax revenue into a capital improvements fund. So if you can afford to create that link, that's a really good thing, and rating agencies love it.
My final question, I think, at the moment is in regards to the skate park, and we had the discussion in regards to needing monies from the town instead of taking it from the CPC account, monies from free cash, I believe it was, instead of CPC. Have you found out the question in regards to being able to replenish that, in regards to
You
file with
can't, yeah.
CPC to?
We can't use CPC to replenish it. We can't. That's not allowed by the Community Preservation Act.
Yeah, so that's something that I guess we need, as the select board, I would like, needs to work on with the CPC.
Yeah, I think.
In regards to making sure that maybe there's extra funding in there, like I think you suggested that a while back.
Yeah, we can look at whether the request for funding can be taken at more than one time a year. We can look at whether there's a way to, under the Community Preservation Act, to create a kind of reserve fund for unforeseen or emergent aspects that come up in the articles or the projects that they're approved, so that they have a bit of relief that they could avail themselves of rather than having to go back through town meeting. Yeah, this is through no fault of the proponents of the article for the skateboard park that they were forced to avail themselves of free cash. They got caught, rather than shut down a pretty valuable asset, their alternative is to use free cash. And so, given the rare circumstance that they're in, I'm revising my recommendation and not including them in this, because we don't need to, and, they're in a circumstance through no fault of their own that they're trying to alleviate.
No, I get that, and wholeheartedly agree with you on that. I know we've discussed it in regards to trying to get that money back through, trying to file something with CPC.
Yeah, I wish you
Saying
could, but,
It's beyond that.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, so obviously we just got to, work on the system of, if there's a cost overrun or something like that, to have money set aside from CPC in order to take care of that. Yes,
Can I add something to that?
yeah, that's fine.
I think.
Can you pass them the microphone?
Sure, I'll step over there.
Identify yourself, please.
Sure. Chris Cuneo, Skate Park Committee. And I just wanted to add something based on what Mr. Moran has done. The idea of having rolling funding and rolling applications and funding for the CPC would be a terrific idea, because that would have avoided our problem. You had a very good suggestion, Mr. Kelly, about adding in a buffer. Here's the problem with that, and we thought about that when we applied. If you add in a buffer and then you go out to bid, the bidders are going to see what the amount is, and the construction will suddenly creep up and absorb the entire budget.
Sure.
So you want, I'm going to leave Mr. Moran to figure this out, but you want as tight a budget as physically possible, I think, and then maybe have this rolling funding thing, because that would have saved us.
So, Peter, in regards to what Mr. Cuneo is saying, you think that's the way to go in regards to this?
I think it's
It is more of a safeguard in regards
Yeah.
to, like we brought, it's like if we have a pot with extra money, the contractors know that, then,
So there are some communities that do it on a rolling basis. Braintree does it on a rolling basis. Phillipston, where I was, out in the middle of Worcester County with 1,900 people, does it on a rolling basis. Norwell does the same thing that Marshfield does, where they take all their applications in the fall and then rate them and vote them. Both ways are acceptable. I want to be respectful of how the CPC operates here. I'd love to have a dialogue with them on whether it's possible, to do a correction wave somewhere else during their time that wouldn't be too disruptive to the process.
Mr. Cuneo, in regards to this cost overrun, if you don't mind going to the microphone again, it was, I definitely certainly see that your point in regards to having a stash of money that people will know about. Can you explain your cost overrun and,
Sure.
and do you feel, I would like to say you guys investigated and it was legit, but do you feel confident that the overrun was correct?
Yes, yes. What happened with us was, let me get the timeline right. So the CPC, so we applied to the CPC in the fall of 2023. Okay?
So you're just doing the work this year, right?
Right.
So you're 2 years out, so the cost have risen since then.
Yeah, and what actually happened was the group, the committee, paid for the design out of their own pocket. And then we invited them when they were at a conference in Boston to come down and look at the site last summer. And while they were here, it was raining. And when they were looking at the site and seeing the rain, they realized there was an additional portion that really needed to be addressed, that they wouldn't and couldn't have seen doing this remotely. By the time we figured all this out, we missed the CPC deadline to apply for more funding for what we call alternate one. And that's what happened.
All right, so, I look at it is that the issue isn't so much that there was a cost overrun that was unanticipated. The whole thing is that you got funding 2 years prior.
That's right.
And with the increase of everything, that you never, I would look at that, you guys never went back to make sure the price is still the same and before you started the work, so you could go back to CPC in a timely manner and get the funding? Would I be looking at that right?
Close. What we did, the bid was actually, we got 215,000. We applied in fall of '23. We got it in summer of '24. The bid for that work was actually $192,000. So the contractor came in under budget, and we were thrilled. But then when they were at a conference in the summer, we invited them down to look at the site to just button it up. And when they came down to look at the site, they realized that there was this wedge of land, and I can show you on the map here, that was completely eroded, and the sand was running down to the park. So what they said was, let's concrete that whole bend. You can see it on the west side of the park. Let's concrete that whole bend. That'll solve that problem, remove the erosion, less maintenance. So they added what was Alt 1. And that put us over the $215,000. Okay?
So, if I'm understanding it right, so the initial project was completed. Were they gone already, or?
No, they're here.
They were still here when you realized the other, so you had them do the work?
Well, they were here with the understanding through the prior town administrator that would fund that shortfall from, after we found out,
Yeah.
too late for CPC,
Right.
with the understanding we'd fund it from free cash. And so we authorized them to proceed, although technically we haven't signed the contract for the Alt 1. You know, we're hoping after July, they've done the work. After July 2nd, June 2nd, we can sign that, pay them.
Okay.
Okay?
So it's just I would just look at that, it's not a neglect on funding, it's just that the timing between you getting the funds and then getting the work started, and then having a hiccup in the process in regards to timing, getting that corrected and getting the funds for
That's
it
right.
was, all right, so.
That's right. And my son will be there at town meeting in case things get hot. He'll explain everything.
I just have one quick clarification question. The term buffer, is that the same as the contingency line in the budget, or is that different?
Yeah, it's kind of the same.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I'm all set. Steve, Jeff.
Thank you. Other questions for the
Please,
select
yeah,
board?
thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say, in regards to some of the follow-up questions that Mr. Felicara asked earlier, I think he did tease out an accurate answer, but one that was just a little bit better. Because I think he's right, if we just said, you know, we overshot munis by 30 grand, we didn't need it, people would be upset, but the clarification that we projected 370K many months out, and once the hard-coded numbers came back in months later, that's the difference right there. So I do think that they would be a lot happier with that answer and that it is still accurate, so I do think it was a good follow-up. And then I thought Sean made a good point earlier, and it makes me think of a comment that came up during town meeting because there were a number of articles dealing with funds being drawn from the wrong account or maybe miscategorized. And there was a comment, you know, why can't we find good people for our finance team? Why can't we keep good people for our finance team? And it's comments like that people don't want to do it or they leave, because we have Sean and Meg who are going back in time and correcting somebody else's errors, but because they're sitting at the table at that exact moment in time, they're getting blamed for them and people assume that it was their fault. So I think that's important to clarify for people because they are doing their job, and we don't want to create a negative incentive where if you're catching mistakes and fixing them and there were mistakes made by your predecessor, that we're going to blame you for them, because then people are going to stop looking for and finding mistakes. So I just thought that was an important distinction and point of clarification to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darcy. Any questions? All set? Great. Any questions from the public? Seeing none. Any questions online? No questions online. Okay. Mr. Moran, I'm assuming that in order for you to move forward with this proposal, which is to make an amendment on the floor of town meeting, that you need some sort of approval or
Yeah, I
agreement?
can give you a copy of a proposed motion that both boards could adopt. I think that would be appropriate guidance to go forward on. Apologize for not asking to approve the bench. I'm giving you two.
Thank you.
So if, it's basically, you'd be moving to amend Article 6 in a number of ways by indefinitely postponing several of the sections, and then amending annual town meeting article in the areas that I've identified.
So,
So it'd be two separate motions.
okay, so these address Article 6 from special town meeting, Article 3
From the annual.
annual, and then Article, forgot the number, sorry, give me 1 second. Article 4. Article 4 is the capital article, and within that, there was an item that was, I had notated, I don't remember if it was from the joint meeting or somewhere else, but I have caught up with Chief Tavares about this to verify, and that if you look on the, that list under the fiscal year 2026 request for the police department, there's two items here. There's $192,000 for police cruisers and $192,000 for tasers. My understanding from Mr. Tavares, and I think he's actually, Chief Tavares, he's actually on the online right now, is that the department does not need that amount for tasers and never did need it, that it was some sort of an erroneous inclusion. Do we need to include that in this, or do we need to add this separately, or?
You can make those adjustments separately at town meeting. I'm focused this evening on fixing the 750 and the unemployment, but the chief, and universally with every department head, but the chief was the first, to come forward and point out areas where he could assist, and I want to, express my gratitude towards him.
Perfect. So he or someone else could stand up and propose
Yeah,
an
either,
amendment?
we can, I don't have an amendment ready for you for that, but
Sure.
we can, subsequent to this meeting, we can have that done.
Perfect. Okay.
If I'm wrong, wasn't there an addenda that mentioned that, for the town meeting?
I can clarify that line item if you'd like, Rick, if that's okay.
Sure.
So basically, at the previous town meeting in the fall, they were already appropriated the funds for the tasers and for the accreditation. So the appropriation that went into this most recent town meeting in June was supposed to be for fiscal year 2026. So it wasn't like anyone asked for more than they needed. It was more so it was just put into the wrong fiscal year. So that's why we were able to reappropriate that towards the $750K, if that's helpful.
Got it. Okay. Understood. From the advisory board, and I'll turn over to select board, is there any opposition on voting for this evening? Anybody that wants to say, I want another week, or I want to come back and discuss this?
On the portion we just discussed?
Yeah, correct. The proposal, the amendments that Mr. Moran is proposing. Any opposition? Okay. So before I move to a vote, I'll toss it over to Mr. Kelly.
I do want to ask, so is the advisory board going to have to read this on their own and then vote on it, and then we have to read this?
You can read it once, and both of you just take separate votes. You can read it once.
So read it once, take separate votes?
Yeah.
On it, okay. Yeah, do either of you two have any questions in regards to this?
No, thank you.
Okay. Trish?
No.
All set? All right, we're ready to go.
All right, so this is a proposed motion. The first one is a proposed motion for the advisory board. It'll be the same motion for the select board, but we'll start with the advisory board. I move that the board approve the town administrator's proposed amendments to Article 6 of the special town meetings as follows. First, indefinitely postpone item 6-6. Second, reduce item 6-7 from $370,000 to $340,000. Number 3, indefinitely postpone item 6-8. Number 4, reduce item 6-13 from $200,000 to $50,000. Number 5, indefinitely postpone item 6-15. Number 6, indefinitely postpone item 6-16. And last, indefinitely postpone item 6-18. I further move to approve the town administrator's proposed amendments to Article 3 of the annual town meeting as follows: to decrease the select board personnel line item from $574,770 to $558,770, to decrease the fixed costs general insurance line from $1,493,926 to $1,473,926, and lastly, to increase fixed costs unemployment compensation line from $0 to $40,000. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Just on the unemployment, wasn't it in there at 50? We went
It was
down?
in there at 50. I wanted to restore it to 50. You took it down to 0 to try to provide additional relief to the school budget. I'm bringing it back up to 40 because that's what I could find to fit.
Is that worded correctly? Because isn't it in the warrant now at 50?
No.
Oh, it isn't? Okay.
Any other discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Nope. All right, passes unanimously from the advisory board.
So this will be the select board vote. Thank you, Rick. This will be the select board vote. Do I have a second?
Did you want to read the motion?
You don't have to read it twice.
Oh, yeah, I asked
Okay,
about that.
perfect.
He said-
Second.
Good.
Aye.
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 Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Warren. We very much appreciate it. All right, okay, so we've moved through that. There are a few other articles that we didn't discuss. We certainly have discussed in prior joint meetings. I'll just open it up to the advisory board. Are there any other articles that will be going forth in front of town meeting and special town meeting that you wish to discuss or have any further questions on at this time? Seeing none, any questions from the select board?
I have none.
No. Any questions from the public? Seeing none, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody's time. I don't have any closing comments other than to just say, Mr. Moran, very much appreciate your diligence in following through and finding the necessary funding and going through with a fine-tooth comb to find areas where we can improve. I think I speak on behalf of the entire advisory board by saying that very much look forward to working with you after town meeting in looking more strategically at the town's finances as we move ahead. So that way we're not trying to fix this in a bit of a jam later on, but instead we're being proactive in trying to address our fiscal health for our citizens. So I very much appreciate that.
Well, I would again extend my appreciation both to the select board and to the advisory board for their patience, and my thanks to Sean and Meg, the treasurer collector and the accountant have done an outstanding job in assisting me, as well as all the department heads that have been incredible to work with in the short time that I've been here. And the residents have been extremely supportive and courteous to me as well. So I've really enjoyed working here and look forward to continuing working during my service to this town with you to try to get you in a good position for the coming fiscal year.
I appreciate that, Mr. Moran.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, any question or any last comments from the select board?
No, I think you summed it up, Rick. Mr. Moran's been an asset to us as of this moment, so I think everybody in town knows that. And I think it's going to going forward, it's going to take a cooperative effort amongst everybody in town to make sure that we are financially viable going forward in the future. So it sounds like we got challenges ahead, but I don't think there's any reason not to believe that we can overcome those challenges.
Well said. I agree. Well said, Mr. Kelly. All right, I'd like to make a motion to conclude our meeting, our joint advisory board, select board meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 I'd like to adjourn that portion for the select board. Do I have a second?
Second?
Aye.
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 Thank you.